Gemma, Sarah, Alfred and James loved ghosts. They'd heard ghost stories all their lives. Now, having just turned 17, they could travel, they could get away from their parents, and even more importantly, they had a car. So, they decided to celebrate driving down out onto Dartmoor, where they'd heard of a haunted village that supposedly only appeared at night, surrounded by fog. They couldn't resist. They'd started as soon as they'd got back from school and headed off. It was a long drive. And in mid-October, the sun started to go down fairly early. They were getting tired as they started to get there. The sun had sunk beneath the horizon. It was a cloudy night, the moon providing little light, and the lack of any form of street lighting when they hit Dartmoor put it into pitch black. Carefully following the sat-nav on their car, they manipulated the roads, carefully driving slowly. They weren't used to these style of country roads, narrow lanes that had full speed traffic in both directions and walls on either side. Several times they'd had to drop to the side to let another car past. That had been scary enough on its own when there was light, but it had got darker and darker. All they could see was the beams from the headlights being filtered and pulled back as the fog came down over the moorland. Loose horses ran, little ponies, sheep, cows, all allowed to graze and live wild on the moors. There had been several batches of rattling as they'd gone over cattle rails that kept the wild animals on the moor rather than progressing out into the wider land. The atmosphere in itself was spooky. There was the stillness that you only ever feel when there's a fog around you at night. The disconnect from the outer world, occasionally pierced by a hoot of an owl in the distance. The girls had already started to get nervous, but the boys, full of bravado, put on the act. The roads got narrower and rougher as they turned off-road slightly onto rough farm-style paths, bumping across the rough terrain till they could see the rough wood ahead, in the middle of which the village was supposed to be. Parking to one side, they got out, each having a large torch and their phones. They turned, letting their beams cast into the light. Together they set off, moving through the darkness of the trees, seeing the moving branches, wondering what else was out there. Were they hearing cracks? What creatures? The boys telling stories of what could be there and enjoying the girls moving up close as they got scared. There was a snap to one side. Even the boys jumped, and as they settled, the girls slapped and laughed at them, all of them thinking this was possibly a bit of a lark. Gradually stepping through, they came, and to their surprise, a clearing started to appear as the trees went. They'd never expected to find the village. They never thought anything would be there. But as they stepped through, it opened up. And there were broken bits of masonry and rough and tumbled houses. 6 or 7. A shriek came in front of them, and they stepped back. You're working, Legion. Eyes wide. And then figured, no, it must have been an animal, and started moving in, shining their torches, seeing it come up, and the looming open area of doorways. The houses weren't giant, but they weren't small. Probably 3 or 4 rooms, some 2 stories. They came to the first one and crept, door hanging on its hinges. One of the boys pushed it open. Sarah pulled him back, saying they shouldn't go in. It was dangerous. They didn't know what was in there. Maybe there could be a serial killer. Maybe the floors would collapse. There could be wild animals. The boys laughed, telling the girls to stay. The boys stepped in, moving through the building. The girls cuddled outside, nervous now. The boys had left them on their own. What was going on? They heard movement. Moving through the house. They could see the shining of the torches hitting the lights. Then they heard it. A scream and a wail and mad movement smashing around the inside of the house. The girls stepped back, screaming for their friends, but they could only hear a scream coming from the inside. Wondering what was going on, they wanted to move up, but they didn't dare. Feeling brave, they stepped in. As they did, they saw Alfred come running down the stairs, waving behind him as there was some movement on a balcony above. They grabbed him and pulled him out, asking where Alfred was. He just looked and screamed. Then, looking up, they saw a figure floating, moving across. The girls screamed, closing their eyes, praying they hadn't seen what they thought they had. Looking back, there was a smack against the wall. The ghost-like creature seemed to have thrown what was sat on its head, but what rolled across the floor was the head of James. The girls cried, ran back. Alfred screamed, and they ran out of the house, the door seeming to slam behind them. They tried heading towards the trees. They wanted to get out, but they ran, and as they ran in, suddenly it was as though they'd got turned round, and they came out of the trees, and they were back in the village. There was no escape. Hearing noises and screaming from the house that they'd been, they moved in another direction, looking, not certain where to go, Seeming to see the ghost starting to come out of the other house, they ran into another one, slamming the door behind them, breathing. Suddenly realizing were they safe, they stopped and went to open the door. But nothing happened. The door stayed shut. They grabbed it more thoroughly, pulling hard, aiming to tug it towards them. But the door, however old and battered, wouldn't budge. There was creaking from above, and the three looked up nervously to see two young children, twin boys, looking down at them. Their smiles started off looking sweet, but then as they looked, they could see there was blood on the boys' tops. They turned, screamed, running through the house, heading through a downstairs door. They slammed it, sat down, and then they heard the creaking, the treading on the stairs behind them, like two small sets of feet, lightly, merrily skipping down the stairs. It's hide and seek time. We will find you. We're coming. And when we get you, you will be ours. Suddenly, the door behind them, a knife came through it, repeating, stabbing. They moved, scrambling away. The door swung open, and the children, both boys, were sat there with large kitchen knives. Daddy showed us how to play. Daddy played with us. And they looked at James. You remind us of Daddy. Now we will play with you. The three kids screamed as the boys took slow, calculated steps towards them. Eyes firmly set on James. James turned, pushed the girls towards them, take them, and scurried, running through one of the doors. The boys looked at each other. He wants to play chase. All the girls saw was the boys smile and turn in perfect unison and start walking through the door. You can't get away that way. We know where you are. We're going to find you. The girls cowered in the remnants of the kitchen, looking towards the side door they hadn't made it to. They scurried over, grabbing on the door, pulling, but the door wouldn't come. And then they heard the screams start. There was a squelching noise, as though a knife was being shoved into meat. And James screamed, cried, begging. The noise went on, getting firmer, as though the knife was going and hitting something hard behind it. It repeated and repeated until there was a final gurgling noise, and all went silent. As it did, the door came open, and the girls scurried out, sat in the middle of the village, looking at each other, holding each other, shaking. Not knowing where to go, they looked. They could see and hear noises coming from varying buildings. An old man, glowing slightly, seeming to float slightly, walked down the road towards them, his eyes missing. They looked and saw a little girl in one of the smaller houses, a sad look on her face, looking at the man. She looked at them. "Help me. If you can help me, I'll help you." Heading in, the girls went towards the child. They had no choice. The man was coming. There were things in the other houses. They scurried through, went up, and the child pushed the door closed. "Thank you. It's too late for me, but I can hold them off. But will you save my friend?" They looked at each other. "He will protect you, but you have to get him out. You have to take him somewhere safe." On the mantelpiece was a small stuffed squirrel with what looked like a knight's helmet. She turned. "Can you get Nutkins out? He was my only friend. He was there for me." The girls nodded and went. "If you have him, the ghosts will leave you. They will get in here, but I'm better off gone. Please, look after Nutkins." The girls nodded and grabbed the stuffed squirrel, opening the door and heading out. They looked behind, hearing the grumbling murmuring, and as they went, it looked like they could see the other ghosts converging on the house of the little girl. As they ran for the trees, the last thing they heard was a scream and a wail of a small lost child. Running, panting, their clothes got torn by the trees as they ran. Their lights got smashed as they fell over, and they were left running through the dark, hearing and looking behind them, thinking they could see vague shapes coming in their direction. They stayed together, desperately clutching the toy squirrel until they got out. The trees branched and they could see a little way off their car. They ran, but they couldn't get into it. James had the keys. They were trapped. They had their phone, they knew the direction, and the two of them set off, walking through the cold, freezing fog, running, stumbling, tripping, cut, bruised, crying. They tripped over until they found a set of stone circles. Just stood, feeling the squirrel pull them towards it. They headed in and sat down in the middle, holding the squirrels and rocking, crying, until gradually later the sun came up. A farmer found them later and knew nothing of the village. Wondered about the boys They said they'd gone into the woods, told the story, but no one believed them. They thought the boys had been pulling a prank. That night the girls dreamed. Together they were sleeping in the same bed, not being prepared to be near anyone else, and cuddling the squirrel between them. In the dream, the little girl came, thanked them. They'd taken Nutkins, they'd escaped, and now they and she were free. But in the dream, they saw the village. The village had 2 more residents. It had the boys. As they woke, all they could wake to was the little girl singing. When they looked, they realised they had both had identical dreams, but they never told anybody. How was that? You got Nutkins. Actually, you got quite a good Nutkins in that one. I liked that Nutkins outcome. I got most of it in there. The old guy didn't steal the eyes, but I was running out at that point. I hope you all enjoyed it. If Patchwork is up and running, then on Sunday I will probably try and do a Patchwork episode to try and create the framework as we did last time for the next story. If not, I don't know whether I will stream or not on Sunday. It's queued, but we will see what the real world has for me between now and then. Otherwise, thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. Tutti, you were asking a question or something at the beginning that I couldn't get to because we were just about to start the story. Can you remember what it was? Or can someone else who can reach a mouse or keyboard scroll back through chat and remind me? Yeah, Dodger came back briefly, but no one managed to find him. He is hard to find, but he is there. He's deliberately well tucked behind. He's only in any episode that I have said at the beginning he will appear in. And in one of the last 2, he's in one of the first couple of pictures. There's a clue for you. If you can't find him there, you're not on. I was just trying to think if there was a way I could send you the timestamp for him. He is in there. If it is mentioned, I do promise on those. Some of the Sherlock Holmes ones I did, he's easier to find. But he is out there. Otherwise, have a good week. Thanks for coming. It's been great fun. Like, subscribe, you know the drill. And farewell for now.